The Duke struck Elowen's burial petition from her hands and tore it before the congregation. "Your father died a common apothecary," Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Ravensmere, declared. "You will not stain my family crypt with his name." The fragments fell across the chapel floor like pale leaves. Elowen knelt to gather them, fighting the humiliation burning behind her eyes. Behind her stood nearly 100 tenants whom Dr. Gideon Hale had treated without payment, yet not one dared challenge the Duke, who owned their cottages and fields. Her father had spent 30 years saving lives at Ravensmere. He had even saved Julian's when a hunting wound turned septic during the first year of their marriage. Now Julian would not grant him 6 feet of earth. "The eastern vault contains my mother's family," Julian continued. "Your request was improper from the beginning. My father did not ask to lie among your ancestors." Elowen rose with the torn petition clenched in one hand. "He asked to be buried beneath the yew tree outside this chapel. You approved it 3 months ago." A brief uncertainty crossed Julian's face. He remembered the conversation. She could see it. But Lady Cecily Vale stood beside him in mourning silk, one gloved hand resting lightly upon his sleeve. "Perhaps His Grace agreed before he understood what you intended," Cecily said. "A grave beside the ducal chapel would allow visitors to mistake an apothecary for a member of the family." Elowen looked at her husband. "Is that truly what you fear?" Julian's jaw tightened. For weeks, Cecily had warned him that Elowen's father used his medical work to influence tenants and collect secrets. Gideon's final accusation, that someone was altering medicines sent from Ravensmere to London, had only strengthened Julian's suspicion that the old man had become dangerously ambitious. "You have until sunset to remove the coffin from my estate," he said. A murmur passed through the congregation. Mrs. Finch, whose infant Gideon had saved from scarlet fever, began to weep. Elowen's maid, Nora Bell, stepped forward, but Elowen stopped her with a small shake of the head. She would not plead before Cecily. "Very well." Elowen placed the torn petition upon the altar. "My father will rest where your name has no authority over him." She walked down the aisle without taking Julian's offered arm. Outside, a cold wind moved through the bare yew branches. Elowen expected to see the modest oak coffin waiting upon the village cart. Instead, 4 royal guards stood beside a black carriage bearing the gilded lion of the crown. On its roof rested another coffin, her father's coffin. Elowen stopped so abruptly that Nora nearly collided with her. "That is impossible," Nora whispered. "We left Dr. Hale at St. Agnes's under Mr. Pritchard's guard." Elowen had checked the coffin herself shortly after dawn. A blue wool cloth had covered it, and the village carpenter had secured the lid with 6 plain iron screws. The coffin before her was draped in black velvet and sealed with crimson wax. One corner had been freshly splintered. From the crack drifted a faint but unmistakable scent. Bitter almonds. Elowen's grief sharpened into alarm. Her father had taught her never to trust scent alone when identifying poison, yet only a handful of substances produced that particular trace. None belonged near a dead apothecary or inside a sealed coffin. A royal officer descended from the carriage. Captain Nathaniel Rowe was broad-shouldered, silver beginning at his temples, his expression grave rather than hostile. "Elowen Ashcombe, Duchess of Ravensmere?" "Yes." He unfolded a document but did not immediately offer it to her. "By order of His Majesty's Office of Domestic Security, no one is to touch or open this coffin." Julian emerged from the chapel with Cecily at his side. "You have entered my estate without permission." "I carry the King's authority, Your Grace." Julian's gaze moved from the royal seal to Elowen. Suspicion settled over his features with painful familiarity. "What have you done?" The question struck harder than his refusal inside the chapel. Once, he had trusted her judgment enough to let her treat his fever through 3 sleepless nights. Now, confronted with something neither of them understood, he chose to suspect her before asking whether she was afraid. Elowen looked back at the coffin. "That is not how we prepared my father for burial." Cecily raised a lace handkerchief to her lips. "Then someone must have changed it after it left your possession." "It never left my possession." Captain Rowe's eyes narrowed. "The coffin was discovered at dawn inside a royal carriage abandoned near Northgate. The coachman is missing, and the guard assigned to him was found dead. The tenants recoiled. Julian stepped toward Elowen. Your father had dealings with the crown? None that he disclosed to me. A convenient answer, Cecily murmured. Elowen ignored her. Near the broken corner, something dark had dried upon the wood. Blood, perhaps, but beside it lay several grains of fine white powder. She bent instinctively to examine them. Captain Rowe seized her wrist before her fingers reached the splinter. Do not touch it. His grip loosened when Elowen met his eyes, but he did not release her completely. Why? She asked. Because the dead guard carried a vial bearing your father's label. Rowe turned the warrant so she could see the name written across it. And a witness claims you purchased the poison found in his body. The courtyard seemed to tilt beneath her. I purchased no poison. That will be determined in London. Julian did not defend her. He merely stared at the warrant, his silence allowing Cecily's accusation to become truth. Then the splintered coffin gave a soft knock from within. Once, twice. Elowen tore her wrist from the captain's grasp. My father may still be alive. Before anyone could stop her, a man's muffled voice came from beneath the sealed lid. Elowen, it gasped. Do not let Cecily leave. Every face in the courtyard turned toward Lady Cecily. For one naked instant, terror stripped the composure from her features. Then she pressed a hand to her chest and gave a breathless laugh. This is grotesque. Surely no one believes that voice came from a dead man. Elowen was already moving toward the coffin. Captain Rowe blocked her path. The royal order forbids. There is a living person inside. She met his gaze without yielding. If your authority requires you to let him suffocate, Captain, you may explain that choice to the king. Another knock sounded beneath the lid, weaker than before. Rowe drew his sword and sliced through the cords securing the velvet covering. Elowen seized the cloth and pulled it aside, exposing the crimson seal. Julian stepped forward as if to help, but she did not look at him. Fetch a crowbar, she ordered. A groom ran toward the stables. Cecily took one careful step backward. Nora noticed. Your Grace, Lady Cecily is leaving. I am unwell, Cecily said sharply. I will not remain for this spectacle. Captain Rowe signaled to two guards. No one leaves the courtyard. Cecily's gaze flashed toward Elowen with such cold hatred that it confirmed what the voice had said before the coffin was even opened. The groom returned with a crowbar. Julian took it from him. I will do it. No. Elowen held out her hand. You have already decided this coffin contains evidence against me. If you open it yourself, Lady Cecily will later claim I persuaded you to disturb it. The rebuke landed visibly. Julian's fingers tightened around the iron before he surrendered it to Captain Rowe. The captain broke the royal seal in front of the entire congregation. Each nail shrieked as it tore free from the oak. When he lifted the lid, a man in a blood-stained coat gasped and rolled toward the light. It was not Gideon Hale. Mr. Pritchard, Nora cried. The village undertaker lay bound inside the coffin, his gray hair plastered to his forehead. A strip of linen had been tied around his mouth, but had slipped beneath his chin. Elowen climbed onto the carriage wheel and cut the cords around his wrists with Rowe's dagger. Where is my father? Pritchard's eyes fluttered. Taken. By whom? A coach arrived at St. Agnes's before sunrise. Royal insignia. Papers with the king's seal. He struggled to breathe. I thought they had come because of the doctor's letter. What letter? Pritchard tried to answer, but his body convulsed. Elowen caught him before his head struck the coffin. His pupils were dilated, and an unnatural redness spread across his neck. Clear the carriage, she commanded. Nora, bring my medical case from the chapel. Captain, I need clean water and charcoal. Julian caught her arm. You cannot treat him when you stand accused of poisoning a royal guard. She looked down at his hand until he released her. Then watch every movement I make. Nora returned with the worn leather case Gideon had given Elowen on her 20th birthday. Its instruments were modest, but she knew each bottle by touch. She crushed charcoal into the water and helped Pritchard swallow. Then she loosened his collar and found a small puncture below his left ear. He was drugged with a needle. Can you identify the substance? Rowe asked. Not yet. The almond scent came from the coffin, not his breath. Someone scattered the powder near the crack so we would associate the two. The captain examined the white grains. A false trail, or a warning. Elowen searched Pritchard's pockets and found them empty except for a wooden button that did not belong to his coat. Its face was carved with a tiny crown surrounded by thorns. Julian recognized it. That is from the livery worn by my mother's private servants. Cecily's expression remained composed, but her right hand closed tightly around her reticule. She had lived with the Dowager Duchess since childhood and controlled most of her correspondence. "Hundreds of such buttons exist," she said. "It proves nothing." Pritchard's fingers closed around Elowen's sleeve. "The woman wore a veil," he whispered, "but I heard her speak to the driver. She said the doctor's body had to reach London before the physicians examined the king." Captain Rowe leaned closer. "Was Dr. Hale alive when they removed him?" "No, but they searched his coat and took a brass key from around his neck." Elowen went still. Her father had worn that key for as long as she could remember. Whenever she asked what it opened, he would smile and tell her that knowledge carried safely was more valuable than gold carried openly. 3 nights before his death, he had pressed that key into Elowen's palm. If anything happened to him, he said, she must take it to the abandoned glass house beyond Ravensmere's northern orchard. She had hidden it inside the hollow handle of her sewing box. Whoever took her father's body did not know he had already given the key away. A guard approached Captain Rowe with a document recovered from beneath the coffin lining. The captain read it, then passed it to Julian. Elowen recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her own. The page contained detailed instructions for preparing a lethal compound, followed by an order to deliver Gideon Hale's body to London. At the bottom appeared her signature and the impression of her personal seal. Julian stared at her. "Did you write this?" "No. Your seal is on it." "My seal disappeared 2 weeks ago. I told you. You told me you had misplaced it, and you refused to question the servants because Cecily said I was becoming forgetful." Julian glanced at his cousin. For the first time, uncertainty disturbed his anger. Captain Rowe folded the forged order. "Until its origin is established, the Duchess remains under investigation." Cecily smiled faintly. "Then perhaps she should be confined somewhere secure." Elowen rose, wiping Pritchard's blood from her hands. "You are right." Cecily's smile vanished. Elowen faced Captain Rowe. "Place me under guard if you must, but place Lady Cecily under the same restriction." Mr. Pritchard named her before witnesses, and her household livery was found on his person. "You cannot compare a respected noblewoman to an apothecary's daughter," Cecily snapped. "No," Elowen replied. "An apothecary's daughter would know better than to forge poison instructions using ink that changes color in sunlight." She took the document from Julian and held it beneath the pale morning sun. Slowly, the black signature turned a bruised shade of violet. Her father had created that ink for one household at Ravensmere, the Dowager Duchess's private correspondence. Before Elowen could say so, flames erupted from the northern orchard. Above the trees, a column of smoke rose from the abandoned glass house, the one place her father had told her the missing key would open. Elowen ran before anyone could order her to remain. The northern orchard lay half a mile beyond the chapel, and the wind was driving the flames toward the abandoned glass house with terrifying speed. Behind her came the pounding of boots, Captain Rowe shouting commands, and Julian calling her name. She did not stop. Her father had forbidden her from visiting the glass house until after his death. Whatever he had concealed there was important enough for someone to steal his body, forge her signature, and set fire to the building in broad daylight. At the edge of the orchard, Elowen found the door already burning. Smoke rolled through the shattered panes, carrying the sharp odors of alcohol, dried herbs, and scorched paper. Julian caught her around the waist as she tried to enter. "You will not go inside. The evidence is burning. So is the roof." She drove her elbow backward and broke his grip. "You refused to hear my father while he was alive. You will not silence him now that he is dead." Julian flinched, but before he could answer, Nora arrived carrying Elowen's sewing box. She had understood without being told. Elowen removed the brass key from its hollow handle. Captain Rowe seized a wet horse blanket from a servant and wrapped it around her shoulders. 3 minutes, he said, "then I drag you out myself." Julian took another blanket. I am going with her. You would only slow me down, Elowen replied. I know the structure. There is a second exit behind the potting room. She wanted to refuse him, but part of the roof collapsed with a roar. There was no time to argue. They entered together. Heat struck Elowen's face as smoke blinded her. Julian kept one hand against the wall while she followed the memory of her childhood visits. Gideon had once cultivated medicinal plants there, before the Dowager Duchess ordered the glass house abandoned. Beyond a row of blackened benches, they found a brass door set into the stone foundation. The key fitted its lock. Inside was a narrow underground storeroom, untouched by the fire. Shelves covered the walls, holding medicine bottles, ledgers, and sealed wooden crates. Each crate bore the Ravensmere crest. Julian stared at them. These are military supply boxes. Elowen opened the nearest one. Beneath a layer of ordinary fever tonic lay dozens of dark glass vials without labels. She uncorked one cautiously and passed it beneath her nose. No scent. That tells us nothing. It tells us someone wanted it to tell us nothing. She dipped a glass rod into the liquid and touched it to a strip of treated paper from her father's work table. The paper darkened from yellow to green. Elowen's stomach tightened. This contains antimony. In what quantity? Enough to produce vomiting, weakness, and heart failure if administered repeatedly. Symptoms easily mistaken for disease. Julian looked toward the remaining crates. These medicines were sent to London? Some were. Others went to the military hospitals and tenant infirmaries. His face lost color. For 2 years, he had allowed Cecily to supervise Ravensmere's charitable medical shipments after dismissing Gideon from the work. Julian had called it a necessary transfer of authority. Cecily possessed noble connections. Gideon possessed only experience. That choice had given her access to every bottle in the room. A beam cracked overhead. We must leave, Julian said. Elowen searched the shelves until she found a leather ledger marked with her father's initials. Several pages had been torn out, but one folded letter remained inside. Julian's ducal seal appeared at the bottom. Elowen unfolded it. The document authorized Lady Cecily to purchase medicinal compounds, hire couriers, and transport sealed goods under the Ravensmere name without inspection. You signed this, she said. Julian read the page. Cecily told me the customs officers were delaying medicine intended for wounded soldiers. And you never asked my father whether unrestricted transport was safe? He had accused her without proof. He brought you records showing that bottles had been altered. He brought me suspicions. He brought you the truth, and you chose the person who flattered you. Julian could not answer. Another section of the ceiling fell, sending sparks across the doorway. He seized 2 crates while Elowen took the ledger and several vials. They reached the rear passage as flames consumed the workroom behind them. Outside, Captain Rowe's guards formed a line from the well. Servants passed buckets while tenants beat out fires spreading across the grass. Cecily stood beneath an oak tree between 2 guards. Her expression changed when she saw the ledger in Elowen's hands. Captain Rowe opened one of the rescued crates. Who had authority over these shipments? Julian's silence answered before his words did. I gave it to Lady Cecily. The captain turned toward her. You will surrender your keys and correspondence. Cecily's laugh sounded brittle. On the accusation of a woman whose forged order was found beside a murdered royal guard. On the authority of the man who signed your transport license. Julian held out his hand. Give him the keys. Cecily stared at him with disbelief. After everything I have done for this family. Now, she removed a ring of keys from her reticule and dropped it into his palm. One was coated with fresh black soot. Elowen noticed it immediately. The fire was set less than 20 minutes ago, she said. How did ash reach a key inside your closed bag? Cecily looked down at her hand. Then she swayed as though overcome and collapsed against one of the guards. While everyone's attention shifted, Elowen saw a young footman slipping away through the orchard. He wore the Dowager Duchess's livery, and one wooden button was missing from his coat. Stop him, the footman ran. Captain Rowe's men pursued him between the trees, but he reached a waiting horse and disappeared through the northern gate. Nora approached Elowen, holding something she had found beside the oak where Cecily fell. a torn piece of black velvet embroidered with a gold lion, identical to the cloth covering the coffin. Inside its hem was a folded strip of paper. Elowen opened it and found a list of 7 names. 6 belonged to people who had recently died after brief illnesses. The 7th was Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Ravensmere. Beside his name, in Gideon Hale's handwriting, were 4 words, dose already being administered. Julian read the warning twice. You believe Cecily has been poisoning me. I believe my father believed someone was. Elowen studied her husband more carefully. His skin looked unusually pale beneath the cold morning light. During the past month, he had complained of exhaustion, stomach pain, and numbness in his fingers. Cecily had blamed overwork and persuaded him to take a strengthening tonic prepared in London. Where is your medicine? In my dressing room. Who gives it to you? His hesitation supplied the answer. Cecily. Captain Rowe ordered 2 guards to remain with the rescued crates while the others escorted Cecily back to the manor. Her collapse had ended as quickly as it began, yet she now walked weakly between them, maintaining the appearance of an injured woman. You are allowing an apothecary's daughter to turn you against your own blood, she told Julian. My wife is the Duchess of Ravensmere, he replied. The defense came too late to comfort Elowen. He had remembered her rank only when his own life became endangered. They returned to the manor through the eastern entrance. Elowen refused to let Julian touch food or drink until she had examined his medicine. In his dressing room, she found a blue bottle beside the washstand. Its label bore Gideon Hale's name. My father did not prepare this. Julian frowned. How can you know without testing it? He shaped every label by hand because the joints in his left thumb were damaged. The lower corner was always uneven. This was cut with a metal press. She poured a few drops into a porcelain dish and added a reagent from her medical case. A dark orange sediment formed at the bottom, the same antimony compound found in the glass house. Julian gripped the edge of the table. How long has this been happening? How long have you taken the tonic? Nearly 6 weeks. Elowen turned to Captain Rowe. He needs to be examined continuously. The poison accumulates in the body, but stopping it abruptly will not repair the damage already done. Julian watched her prepare clean water and a mild restorative. You are treating me after what I did at the chapel. I am preventing a murder. Do not mistake professional duty for forgiveness. The words struck him into silence. A search of the adjoining rooms produced 11 more bottles bearing Gideon's forged label. 8 were hidden inside Cecily's locked cabinet. The remaining 3 were found among medicines intended for the Dowager Duchess. Captain Rowe inspected the bottles. Was the Duke the only target? Perhaps not, Elowen said, but poisoning him slowly would make his death appear natural. Cecily could then claim she had cared for him until the end. And who inherits Ravensmere if I die? Julian asked. My son, said a voice from the doorway. The Dowager Duchess entered leaning upon an ivory cane. Lavinia Ashcombe was 62, still imposing despite the tremor in her right hand. Behind her stood Cecily's widowed mother, Lady Honora Vale. Cecily's brother is the nearest male relative after you, Lavinia continued. Your marriage has produced no child. The statement wounded Elowen more than she expected. She and Julian had once wanted children. After 2 miscarriages, affection had become caution, then blame, and finally distance. Cecily had arrived during that distance and made herself indispensable. Lady Honora stepped forward. This accusation is absurd. My daughter has protected Ravensmere while Elowen filled the house with her father's vulgar experiments. Your daughter controlled the medicine sent to my husband, Elowen replied, because you were incapable of giving him an heir or managing his household. Julian's expression hardened. That is enough. It was the first time he had silenced Honora on Elowen's behalf, yet he had permitted the same insults for nearly 2 years. Captain Rowe ordered Cecily's room sealed. When a guard reached for her writing desk, she calmly surrendered its key. You will find nothing, Cecily said, because I have done nothing. The desk contained invitations, household accounts, and letters from London society. None mentioned poison or the stolen coffin. Cecily watched the search with growing confidence. Elowen examined the soot-covered key, recovered from her reticule. It opened neither the desk nor the medicine cabinet. Its narrow shaft resembled a key used for document cases. Then she noticed faint blue fibers caught between its teeth. Her father's medical case had been lined with blue velvet. "Where are the possessions taken from his body?" she asked. No one answered. Nora had brought Gideon's coat and spectacles to Elowen after his death, but the medical case had disappeared. Pritchard believed it had been buried with him. Elowen had assumed the undertaker secured it inside the coffin. "Search Lady Cecily's carriage," she told Captain Rowe. Lady Honora moved toward the door. "You have no authority to search private property." "I do," Rowe said. In the carriage compartment, they found Gideon's blue-lined case beneath the rear seat. The lock had been forced, and most of its contents were gone. One hidden pocket remained unopened. Elowen used the soot-covered key. Inside was a packet of letters bound with red thread. The first carried the Dowager Duchess's seal and ordered Gideon to conceal the illness of a member of the royal family. The second promised him protection if he identified who had altered the royal medicines. The final letter was addressed to Elowen. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, the poisoner has learned that I kept 2 sets of records. The ledger in the glass house will reveal how the medicine traveled. The second will reveal who paid for it." Beneath those words, Gideon had drawn a rough map of Ravensmere Chapel. A cross marked the place where Julian had forbidden his burial. Under the yew tree, exactly where Gideon had requested his grave, her father had hidden the second ledger. Before Elowen could show Captain Rowe, a church bell began ringing frantically. A guard rushed into the room. "Your Grace, the grave beneath the yew tree has been opened." Elowen looked through the window toward the chapel. A rider was fleeing across the southern field, carrying a leather book beneath his coat. Beside the violated grave lay Nora Bell, motionless in the mud. Elowen reached the chapel before the servants carrying the stretcher. Nora lay beside the opened grave, one hand pressed to her throat. Her breathing was shallow, but a pulse fluttered beneath Elowen's fingers. "She is alive." A sweet herbal scent clung to Nora's lips. Elowen opened her eyelids and found the pupils contracted. "Not antimony," she said. "Laudanum." She mixed mustard powder with warm water to induce vomiting, then kept Nora's airway clear, while Captain Rowe sent 2 mounted guards after the fleeing rider. Julian knelt beside them. "What can I do?" "Find something bearing the rider's scent. A glove, a cloth, anything he touched." Julian searched the disturbed earth and recovered a torn leather strap. Elowen recognized the crest burned into it. "It belongs to Cecily's traveling case." From the manor, Cecily insisted that the case had been stolen. Lady Honora accused Elowen of planting the strap, but Julian no longer dismissed the evidence. Nora coughed and opened her eyes. "He wore a servant's coat," she whispered. "The same footman who fled the glass house. I followed him here. He dug beneath the roots and found a metal box. Did you see his face?" "Only when his scarf slipped. There was a scar across his chin." Captain Rowe recognized the description. The man was Silas Vane, a former military courier dismissed for selling dispatches. Cecily had claimed he was a distant relative of one of the maids. "Did he take everything?" Elowen asked. Nora reached inside her sleeve and withdrew a folded sheet stained with mud. "I tore this from the ledger before he struck me." The page listed payments made over 9 months to S. Vane. Each payment corresponded with a medicine shipment from Ravensmere. The final entry was £300 for transporting the physician and the royal witness to an address in London. "Royal witness," Julian said. "The guard found dead near the carriage?" "Perhaps he was meant to be transported alive," Elowen replied. "Someone killed him when the plan failed." At the bottom of the page appeared the initials L.H., Lady Honora. Captain Rowe examined the writing. "This is enough to detain her." "Not yet," Elowen said. "Initials can be forged as mine were. We need the remaining ledger." Hoofbeats approached. One of Rowe's guards returned riderless, blood running from a cut above his eye. Vane escaped into Blackthorn Wood. He abandoned the book near the river. The second guard carried the leather ledger. Its pages were soaked, but most remained readable. Captain Rowe turned to the final entries. Several named Lady Honora as the source of payments. Others referred to Cecily as the future Duchess, yet one page bore instructions written in Elowen's hand. Julian read them aloud. Continue the doses until His Grace can no longer sign his name. Upon his death, destroy Dr. Hale's records and place suspicion upon Lady Cecily Vale. Lady Honora smiled triumphantly. There is your poisoner. It is another forgery, Elowen said. Conveniently, every piece of evidence against you is false. Captain Rowe compared the writing with Elowen's signature on the burial petition. The resemblance was nearly perfect. Julian looked at his wife, conflict tightening his face. Is there any way to prove when this was written? Elowen touched the wet paper. The ink did not turn violet in sunlight. This forgery had been prepared by someone who understood why the first had failed. A bell rang at the estate gate. A royal magistrate had arrived with orders to take Elowen into custody for the murder of the dead guard and the attempted poisoning of her husband. Captain Rowe read the warrant, then lowered his voice. It was issued yesterday, before the coffin had been discovered, before the guard's body had been found, before anyone was supposed to know a crime had occurred. Elowen looked at the magistrate waiting beneath the royal banner. The scar across his chin matched Nora's description of Silas Vane. Elowen did not look directly at the scar again. If Silas Vane realized Nora had identified him, he might kill her before anyone could intervene. Instead, Elowen turned to Captain Rowe and spoke loudly enough for the servants to hear. I will cooperate with the Crown. The captain's eyes narrowed. He understood that she had noticed something. The false magistrate descended from his carriage with 4 armed men. He wore a dark judicial coat and carried a leather document case beneath one arm. The scar on his chin disappeared into the high collar of his shirt. Duchess of Ravensmere, he announced, you are charged with murder, treasonous interference in royal medicine, and conspiracy against your husband. Julian stepped between him and Elowen. Show me the warrant. Vane presented the paper without hesitation. It displayed the royal seal and the signature of Lord Chancellor Marrow. Julian examined it. It appears genuine. It cannot be, Elowen said. The Lord Chancellor signs official warrants with his left hand. This signature slopes in the wrong direction. Vane's expression did not change. A desperate observation from an accused poisoner. Then allow Captain Rowe to verify your credentials. My authority exceeds his. That is not how royal investigations are conducted, Rowe said. Give me your identification. Vane's men shifted their hands toward their pistols. Elowen looked at the carriage. Its royal insignia appeared convincing from a distance, but the gilded lion faced left. On official vehicles, it always faced toward the carriage door, the direction of protection. The same reversed lion had appeared on the coffin's velvet cloth. This is the carriage used to steal my father, she said. Vane drew his pistol. Captain Rowe knocked Elowen aside as the shot exploded. The ball struck the chapel wall, showering them with stone fragments. Julian lunged at Vane, but one of the impostor's men hit him across the temple with a pistol grip. Rowe's guards opened fire. Tenants scattered among the graves, while Elowen crawled toward Nora. She dragged her behind the yew tree and shielded her as another bullet tore through the branches. Vane seized the recovered ledger from the captain's hands and ran toward his carriage. Elowen saw a small bottle fall from his coat and shatter against a gravestone. Colorless liquid spread across the stone. The moss blackened instantly. Not medicine, acid. He intends to destroy the ledger, she shouted. Vane threw the book inside the carriage, where a brazier burned beneath the seat. Elowen snatched up the torn iron handle from the grave marker and struck the carriage wheel as the driver urged the horses forward. The damaged wheel cracked beneath the vehicle's weight. The carriage overturned at the edge of the churchyard. Vane escaped through the broken door, but Julian tackled him before he reached the trees. They struck the ground together. Vane drove a knife into Julian's shoulder. Julian grunted but held on until Rowe's guards dragged the courier away. The ledger had fallen beside the brazier. Several pages burned before Elowen smothered them with her cloak. Captain Rowe searched Vane and found a second royal seal, 3 forged warrants, and a letter instructing him to bring Elowen to an abandoned toll house instead of London. The letter was signed by Lady Honora. Arrest her, Julian said through clenched teeth. 2 guards returned to the manor. Minutes later, one came running back. Lady Honora and Lady Cecily are gone. Their rooms connect to an old servants' passage. Julian's face hardened. That passage exits near the western road. Vane laughed, despite the blood on his mouth. By now, they are beyond your land. Elowen knelt beside him. Where is my father's body? His amusement vanished. You were paid to transport him, she continued. The ledger proves it. Lady Honora will sacrifice you the moment you become inconvenient. You know nothing about her. I know she sent you here wearing a false face while she escaped. If you had succeeded, the crown would have hunted you for kidnapping a duchess. If you failed, you would hang for the guard's murder. Vane looked toward the empty road. Elowen lowered her voice. Tell me where my father is, and Captain Rowe can testify that you cooperated. For several seconds, Vane remained silent. Then he said, Gideon Hale discovered that the royal poisonings began before Lady Cecily controlled the medicine shipments. Lady Honora wanted his records, but she needed something else from his body. What? A silver locket sewn beneath his shirt. Elowen had never seen her father wear a locket. What was inside it? The portrait of a woman who was never supposed to know him. Before Vane could explain, his body convulsed. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. Elowen caught his jaw and smelled the familiar trace of bitter almonds. A false tooth in the back of his mouth had broken, releasing poison. Whether he had bitten it deliberately or someone had forced him to carry it, she could not tell. Vane seized Elowen's wrist with his remaining strength. The Dowager, he gasped. Ask who she was before she married Ravensmere. His hand fell away. Behind Elowen, the Dowager Duchess stood at the chapel gate. The ivory cane had slipped from her fingers, and for the first time in Elowen's memory, Lavinia Ashcombe looked terrified. Your father, she whispered, was the only man who knew my eldest child survived. Lavinia's confession silenced even the wounded men around her. Julian pressed one hand against the knife wound in his shoulder. What eldest child? The Dowager Duchess looked toward the tenants who had gathered beyond the chapel wall. Not here. You concealed this long enough, Elowen said. You will speak now. For once, Lavinia did not object to being commanded. Before I married your grandfather, I loved a physician's apprentice. I became pregnant, but my family arranged my marriage to Ravensmere before the child was born. Gideon helped me deliver a daughter in secret. Julian's face changed. Who was she? Honora. Lady Honora Vale, publicly presented as Lavinia's orphaned cousin, was actually her firstborn daughter. Gideon had kept the truth hidden for more than 40 years. And Cecily? Julian asked. My granddaughter. The revelation seemed to disgust him. Cecily had spent 2 years encouraging his affection and allowing society to assume she would eventually replace Elowen. You knew Cecily and I were related this closely. I never believed you would marry her while Elowen lived, but you encouraged her presence in my household. I wanted my first family and my second family united. I thought proximity might heal what secrecy had damaged. Elowen heard the evasion beneath those polished words. You wanted to compensate Honora without admitting she was your daughter. Lavinia lowered her eyes. Honora had been raised near wealth but denied its name. She watched Lavinia's legitimate son inherit everything, while she remained dependent upon the family's discretion. When her husband died, she returned to Ravensmere with Cecily and her son, Marcus Vale, the nearest male heir through his late father's distant Ashcombe line. If Julian died childless, Marcus would inherit the dukedom. Cecily, as Julian's devoted companion, could claim a generous settlement and retain influence over the estate. Honora's children would control everything Lavinia had been unable to give her. Did my father know about the poison? Elowen asked. He came to me 6 weeks ago, Lavinia replied. He believed Honora had discovered the sealed birth record and was using it to blackmail someone in the royal household. Whom? I do not know. Gideon refused to name the person until he had proof. And you said nothing to us. I feared scandal. Elowen stared at her. So you allowed my father to face the danger alone. I asked him to stop investigating. You asked him to protect your reputation while someone poisoned your son. Lavinia's composure finally fractured. I did not know Julian was a target. You knew enough to be afraid. Julian turned away from his mother. The movement pulled at his wound, and blood soaked through his coat. Elowen went to him by instinct, then stopped herself. "Sit down. I can ride. You have been poisoned for 6 weeks and stabbed within the hour. Sit down before pride finishes what Cecily began." He obeyed. While Elowen cleaned and bandaged the wound, Captain Rowe questioned Lavinia about Honora's possible destination. The Dowager mentioned 3 properties belonging to the Vale family, but Elowen remembered the forged warrant. "The abandoned toll house," she said. "Vane was ordered to take me there. Honora may have gone to remove whatever she left behind." Captain Rowe prepared 6 mounted guards. Julian insisted on joining them. "No," Elowen said. "This began because I gave Cecily authority she should never have possessed. And bleeding to death on the road will repair nothing." He looked at her with raw shame. "I refused your father a grave because my mother called him dangerous, and Cecily called him ambitious. If his body is there, I will bring him home." Elowen wanted to say that Gideon's home had never been Ravensmere in Julian's eyes. Instead, she tightened the bandage and allowed him to ride in the guarded carriage. They reached the toll house shortly before sunset. The building stood beside an unused road, its windows boarded and its stable roof collapsing. Inside they found broken medicine bottles, blood-stained ropes, and the Royal Guard's missing uniform. A trail of fresh blood led beneath the floor. Captain Rowe's men lifted the boards and uncovered a stone cellar. At its center stood Gideon Hale's coffin. Elowen descended alone. Her father lay inside wearing the coat in which she had prepared him for burial. His face was peaceful despite everything done to him. A jagged cut crossed the lining beneath his collar, where someone had searched for the silver locket. Elowen placed trembling fingers against his cold cheek. "I found you," she whispered. Something pressed beneath the fabric at his wrist. Sewn inside his cuff was a second, smaller key and a rolled strip of paper. The message contained only one line: "The locket is not with me. It is hidden where Lavinia buried her first name." A gunshot thundered above. Elowen climbed from the cellar and found one guard wounded near the entrance. At the rear of the toll house, Lady Cecily stood trapped against the boarded window. Lady Honora held a pistol to her own daughter's head. "Give me Gideon's message," Honora ordered, "or Cecily dies for a title she was never clever enough to earn." Elowen held the message where Honora could see it. Cecily stood rigid beneath the pistol, all her former elegance gone. Blood streaked one side of her face, and the sleeve of her mourning dress had been torn away. "Mother," she whispered, "you said no one else would be harmed." Honora gave a bitter smile. "And you believed me because believing required less courage than asking questions." Captain Rowe's guards surrounded the toll house, but none could fire without risking Cecily's life. Julian remained near the doorway, one hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder. Elowen stepped forward. "You needed Cecily alive to become Julian's widow. I needed her obedient. And now? Now I need Gideon's message." Elowen glanced at the windows. Honora had chosen her position carefully. Behind her, loose boards concealed an opening large enough to escape through. "You already searched my father's body," Elowen said. "The locket was gone, because he gave it to someone." "Who? You think I would answer an apothecary's daughter? That is precisely whom you should answer. Your entire plan is collapsing because you underestimated one." Honora's finger tightened around the trigger. Elowen raised the paper. "Let Cecily walk toward Captain Rowe. When she reaches him, I will give this to you. Throw it. The wind will carry it beneath the floorboards. Then neither of us will have it." Honora considered the risk. Finally, she pushed Cecily away. Cecily stumbled forward. Halfway across the room, she stopped and turned toward her mother. "Did you poison the Duke from the beginning?" Honora's expression hardened. "I gave you an opportunity. All you had to do was keep him dependent upon you. You told me the tonic merely weakened him. And what did you imagine would happen after months of increasing doses?" Cecily's lips parted, but no answer came. Elowen understood then that Cecily was neither innocent nor the architect. She had knowingly drugged Julian to make him distrustful and reliant upon her, but Honora had concealed the fatal strength of the poison. Cecily had wanted Elowen's place. Honora had wanted Julian dead. "Keep walking," Captain Rowe ordered. Cecily took another step. Honora fired. Julian threw himself between Cecily and the pistol. The ball grazed his side, and he crashed against the wall as Rowe's guards rushed forward. Honora tore away the loose boards and escaped through the opening. Elowen could have followed her. She still held the message and knew Honora would not travel far without trying to recover it. Then Julian collapsed. His breathing became irregular, his skin cold and damp. The shock of the wound had intensified the poison already weakening his heart. "Elowen," Captain Rowe called. "Which way?" She looked toward the darkening road, then at the man bleeding on the floor. "Take 3 guards and follow Honora," she said. "Do not approach if she reaches an accomplice." Rowe left while Elowen knelt beside Julian. Cecily backed away. "Let him die. If he survives, he will condemn us both." Elowen looked up sharply. "Us?" Cecily's face crumpled as she realized what she had admitted. "You knew enough to stop administering the tonic," Elowen said. "You chose not to. He humiliated me whenever I questioned him. He treated me like an ornament until your marriage began failing. Then, suddenly, I mattered. So you made him ill enough to need you. I did not know Mother intended to kill him. You knew you were poisoning him." Cecily sank against the wall. Elowen turned back to Julian. His pulse was weakening. She prepared a stimulant, controlled the bleeding, and forced him to remain conscious. "Look at me." His eyes opened with difficulty. "I believed them," he whispered. "Yes, I chose to. Yes." He seemed to expect comfort, but Elowen gave him only the truth. Stay alive long enough to answer for it. For the next hour, she worked while guards carried Gideon's coffin from the cellar. Julian's heartbeat gradually steadied, though he remained too weak to stand. Captain Rowe returned after nightfall. Honora had reached the river, abandoned her horse, and disappeared aboard a waiting boat. One guard found a packet of royal medical labels near the bank. "She is going to London," Elowen said. Rowe nodded. "A messenger arrived while we were searching. The king's physician has been found dead." Cecily lifted her head. "Then Mother has begun the final dose." "What final dose?" Elowen demanded. Cecily stared at Gideon's coffin. "The medicine intended for the royal banquet tomorrow night. Mother said that once the king fell ill, she would expose a conspiracy led by Dr. Hale and his daughter. Julian's death would prove Elowen had poisoned everyone who discovered her treason." Captain Rowe turned toward the horses. "London is nearly a day's ride. Not by the military road," Julian said weakly. "I granted Cecily access to it when I signed her transport authority." His own reckless signature had given Honora a protected route directly to the palace. Elowen unfolded Gideon's message again. "The locket is hidden where Lavinia buried her first name." She finally understood. Before becoming Lavinia Ashcombe, the Dowager Duchess had been Lavinia Wren. Her family's abandoned London residence stood opposite the royal apothecary, the perfect place for Gideon to hide evidence and observe the poison shipments. The house was also directly beside the military road's final gate. Elowen rose. "Honora is not merely going to the palace," she said. "She is going to Wren House to destroy the proof before the banquet begins." Cecily's face turned white. "She cannot." "Why?" "Because the locket does not contain a portrait." Cecily looked toward Lavinia, who had just entered behind the guards. "It contains the name of Honora's real father, the man who now controls access to the king's table." Lavinia closed her eyes as though Cecily had spoken a sentence she had dreaded for 40 years. "Sir Edmund Wycliffe," she said. Captain Rowe stared at her. "The Lord Steward?" "The man who controlled the royal kitchens, approved palace suppliers, and supervised every servant permitted near the king's table, was Honora's biological father. As a young physician's apprentice, Edmund Wycliffe had abandoned Lavinia when her pregnancy threatened his ambitions. Years later, a wealthy patron secured him a position at court. He buried his medical past, purchased respectability, and rose until few people in England possessed greater access to the royal household. "Honora discovered the truth last year," Cecily explained. "She threatened to expose him unless he helped our family." "What did she demand?" Elowen asked. "At first, money, then access to the palace dispensary and permission for Ravensmere shipments to pass inspection." Julian looked sickened. "Authority I gave her. Yes, Elowen said. "Authority my father warned you not to give." He accepted the accusation without defending himself. Captain Rowe arranged a guarded carriage for Julian, but Elowen insisted he remain at Ravensmere. "If you travel tonight, your heart may fail before London. The king is endangered because of my signature. Then live long enough to confess that publicly." Julian removed his ducal signet ring and placed it in her palm. "Use my name, my property, and every horse I own. No one at the military gates will stop you." Once, possession of his ring would have signified trust between them. Now it was merely a tool, offered after trust had become useless. Elowen closed her fingers around it. "Nora will supervise your medicine. You will take nothing she has not prepared herself." She departed with Captain Rowe, Cecily, and 4 guards. Gideon's coffin followed in a separate carriage under royal protection. Elowen would not permit her father's body to disappear again. They changed horses twice and reached London shortly after dawn. Wren House stood abandoned behind rusted iron gates, its windows clouded with dust. The smaller key found in Gideon's cuff opened a concealed door beneath the rear staircase. Inside the hidden chamber, they discovered shelves of duplicate records. Gideon had traced every altered shipment from Ravensmere to the royal dispensary. Beside the ledgers lay sealed samples of the original medicine and the poisoned replacements. At the center of the desk rested the silver locket. It contained no portrait. Inside were 2 tiny documents folded together, Honora's original birth record and a signed acknowledgement from Edmund Wycliffe that she was his daughter. Captain Rowe exhaled. "This proves the means of blackmail, but not that Wycliffe cooperated willingly," Elowen said. She examined the desk more closely. One drawer had been opened recently, and fresh candle wax marked the floor. Honora had reached the house before them. A floorboard creaked upstairs. The guards searched every room but found only a discarded cloak and an empty medicine case. Honora had taken something from the hidden chamber and escaped through the adjoining property. Cecily picked up the case. "This belonged to Mother. She carried the banquet vials inside it. If it is empty, the poison is already at the palace," Rose said. They reached the royal gates less than an hour before the banquet. Julian's signet and Rose's credentials secured their entry, but Lord Steward Wycliffe intercepted them outside the great hall. He was an elegant man in his 60s, with silver hair and an expression polished by decades at court. "The Duchess of Ravensmere is wanted for murder," he said. "Captain, surrender her immediately." Rowe presented the forged warrants recovered from Vane. "Those accusations were manufactured using your office." Wycliffe barely glanced at them. "A criminal courier's possessions prove nothing." Elowen held up the silver locket. For the first time, his composure faltered. "Gideon Hale kept the record you failed to destroy," she said. Wycliffe looked toward the guards surrounding them. "Not here." That is what every guilty person says when the truth approaches a public room. He lowered his voice. "You do not understand Honora. She will kill the king and blame you unless you give her that locket. She no longer needs it. The banquet medicine has already passed through your inspection." Wycliffe's silence confirmed it. "You knew the shipment was dangerous," Elowen said. "I knew she had altered several bottles. She promised the dose would cause only temporary illness, enough to force the king to dismiss ministers who opposed Marcus Vale's advancement. You believed a poisoner because the alternative was admitting your own cowardice." Music began inside the great hall. The banquet was starting. Captain Rowe ordered Wycliffe detained, but the Lord Steward shouted to the palace guards that Elowen was attempting to assassinate the king. Swords were drawn, trapping Rowe and his men in the corridor. Cecily suddenly seized the locket from Elowen and ran into the hall. Elowen followed. Hundreds of nobles watched as servants filled the royal glasses. At the king's right hand stood Lady Honora, disguised in the formal black dress of a senior palace attendant. She lifted a crystal decanter. Cecily stopped beside her mother and held out the locket. "I brought it." Honora smiled, took the evidence, and dropped it into a candle flame. Then she poured the poisoned wine into the king's glass. The king raised it toward his lips, and every guard in the room turned his weapon upon Elowen. "Your Majesty, do not drink," Elowen's voice carried across the great hall. The king paused with the glass inches from his lips. Lady Honora stepped away from the table and pointed toward Elowen. That woman poisoned her husband and murdered a royal guard. Arrest her. 2 palace guards seized Elowen's arms. Examine the wine first, Elowen said. If I am lying, you may arrest me afterward. Lord Steward Wycliffe entered behind Captain Rowe. His face was gray, but he still possessed enough authority to command the room. The Duchess is attempting to create panic. No, Elowen replied. She is asking why you approved medicine and wine transported under an unrestricted license obtained through blackmail. Murmurs spread among the guests. Honora's eyes moved toward the nearest exit. Elowen turned to Cecily. You administered the first doses to Julian. You know what the poison does. Tell the king what your mother placed in his glass. Cecily stared at the burning locket. The paper inside had blackened, but the silver casing remained intact. If I speak, she whispered, I will lose everything. You lost everything when your mother decided you were more useful as a corpse than a daughter. Honora stepped toward her. Do not listen to her. Cecily looked at the pistol concealed beneath her mother's dress, then at the scar left where the bullet intended for her had grazed Julian. The decanter contains antimony, she said. Mother mixed it with a bitter cordial to disguise the taste. She planned to blame the Duchess and Dr. Hale. Captain Rowe ordered the table cleared. Elowen placed a few drops of wine into a silver dish and added the reagent from her father's medical case. Dark orange sediment formed immediately. The king set down his glass. Arrest Lady Honora. Honora drew her pistol, but Cecily struck her wrist before she could fire. The weapon discharged into the ceiling. Guards forced Honora to the floor and recovered forged labels, palace keys, and a vial of concentrated poison from her clothing. Wycliffe attempted to leave through the servants' corridor. Captain Rowe blocked him. The duplicate records from Wren House proved how the scheme worked. Julian's unrestricted transport license allowed Honora to move altered medicines under the Ravensmere crest. Wycliffe used his position to prevent inspections. Vane stole Gideon's body and killed the royal guard after the man discovered that the coffin contained evidence. Elowen's seal and handwriting were forged so every death would point toward her. Honora had targeted Elowen because Gideon taught her enough medicine to recognize the poison, and because discrediting Julian's lawful wife cleared the way for Cecily to control him. The king ordered Honora and Wycliffe held for trial. Honora was later convicted of murder, attempted regicide, and conspiracy against the crown. Her property was seized to compensate the victims' families. Wycliffe lost his office, fortune, and title. His testimony spared him execution, but he spent the remainder of his life imprisoned. Cecily confessed to administering the early doses and helping forge Elowen's seal. Because she testified against her mother and helped prevent the king's death, she avoided the harshest sentence. She was stripped of her social position and sent to labor under supervision in a hospital for impoverished women, the very people she had once considered beneath her notice. 3 weeks later, Gideon Hale's funeral was held again at Ravensmere. This time the entire county attended. Julian stood before the same congregation that had watched him tear Elowen's petition. He had survived, though the poison left him with a weakened heart and a permanent tremor in his right hand. My wife warned me, he said publicly. Her father warned me. I rejected the truth because Cecily flattered my pride, while they demanded that I examine my choices. I humiliated Elowen, denied Gideon the grave I had promised him, and gave authority to those who harmed my household and endangered the king. He unfolded a new legal declaration. Julian restored Elowen's independent marriage settlement, transferred the glass house and its surrounding land into her sole control, and endowed a medical trust in Gideon's name. He also resigned his royal appointments and surrendered management of the estate until an independent council repaired the damage caused by the poisoned shipments. Then he placed Elowen's wedding ring upon the chapel altar. I will not ask you to forgive me, he said, nor will I use my title to determine what you choose next. Elowen watched him without the anger she once feared would consume her. What remained was clearer and stronger than anger. You loved me when trusting me was easy, she said. When trust required courage, you chose everyone but me. Julian lowered his head. I know. I will not return to our marriage." Pain crossed his face, but he did not protest. Their legal separation was completed before winter. Julian funded every act of restitution without attaching his name to Elowen's work. He lived with the consequences of his decisions and never again claimed that remorse entitled him to her presence. Beneath the yew tree, Gideon was finally laid to rest. Elowen placed the original torn burial petition inside his grave, not as proof of her humiliation, but as evidence of what she had survived. Then she turned toward the restored glass house, where a line of patients already waited outside the new Gideon Hale Medical School. Nora stood at its entrance holding a brass nameplate. Elowen fixed it above the door herself. For the first time, no ducal crest appeared above her head, no husband's permission authorized her work, and no locked gate stood between her knowledge and those who needed it. She opened the door. "Bring in the first patient."